presentation. And what I would tell you to do you think we should open some windows so we don't go to sleep? If we see anyone nodding off, the window near them gets opened. Okay, that's the plan. There we go. Thank you, Monty. And let's just pray again for the Spirit to help us understand. Heavenly Father, thank you again for this knowledge that will be shared with us, and may our hearts and minds open to embrace it. Send your Spirit to be our teacher. And thank you again for just the knowledge and insight and wisdom that Dr. Clark has brought to us today. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Somebody catches you all the time on these things. How does that happen? I don't know if I can get this back on my belt. Carmen, where are you? There it is. I got it. Thanks. Okay, so I understand the challenge. We've had a wonderful meal. Thank you very much to everybody who put food systems to work, right? And I was trying to calculate if we were up to the 70 to 90% of our waking hours, but yesterday, and it showed today, right? Okay, thank you so much. That was just terrific. And thank you for bearing with one more talk about old stuff. Old stuff isn't bad. Old stuff actually can be pretty interesting, so I hope so. This afternoon, we want to focus on one of the kind of the one of the major means of connecting archaeology with text, with Bible, and that is inscriptions. So inscriptions carry a certain kind of weight that an artifact does not. We interpret everything. There's nothing we do archaeologically that we do not interpret. I have a book, it's actually out in the car, I forgot to bring it in. Sometime you might want to look it up. It's called Motel of the Mysteries by David Macaulay, an Egyptologist, who sets up an excavation at a motel from about 3900 AD, a motel that was destroyed when a volcano erupted and buried it in ash, and they're excavating this. No, the motel was from where we are, and the excavation was taking place in 3900, in 3900 or 4000 AD. Okay, so 2,000 years ahead of us, and they're looking back at us, and they have come upon this mystery, this building, and it's not Howard Carter, it's Howard Carson, who goes down and says, "What do you see?" "I see these wonderful things." And these wonderful things, they've opened up the door to a motel room. Probably a Motel 6 or something like that. And in the process, they found all kinds of artifacts. They found this piece of furnishing that was square and had a glassy front, and they thought that must have been an altar. And then they found the little chain for the bathroom plug, and they made that into a necklace with a pendant. And so they did all of this, and it was a total spoof on archaeologists and how they interpret things. And the big thing was that in the past, people have always given a religious interpretation to things. So this must be an altar. It's a TV. This must be, something else, but no. So, but it's a fun book, and it takes you about 20 minutes to read. So, Motel of the Mysteries. If you get a chance, just get that book and have fun reading it. But it points to a serious issue, and that is, how do we interpret what we find? The artifacts that we had out here, I mean, we had fun with those, and I appreciate so much your engagement with deciding what these were. Inscriptions. Inscriptions are the instructions that the artifacts don't have. And so now we're in a position where we can understand a lot more about these artifacts and about life in ancient times. But there still is interpretation to do, as you'll see. So what I'm going to do, we're going to go through some slides on the PowerPoint, and we're going to do it sort of chronologically, but sort of thematically. I want to do it with what I consider the 4 major categories of inscriptions that relate to biblical material. Okay? And then in each of those categories, we will go chronologically. So we will come to the younger, who will feel better when we get to the later ones, because it'll be more like us. Okay, it'll be younger ones. Okay, so when we start and we think about these categories of inscriptions connected to the Bible, the first one, and I'll list all 4 of them, but then we'll go back and do each of them individually. Inscriptions that provide general background for the Bible. So we'll give some examples of those. And then the second one, we're actually going to get closer and closer to the Bible itself. Okay? Those that give general background, those that tie more closely to biblical accounts, where you can say, okay, I know this account, I know this name from the Bible, I understand this account. And then there are going to be those that are actually going to have these precise details. Not just names, but the name of a person and that person's father, who then shows up in Jeremiah as that name and that person's father. That's going to be hard to say. We're not talking about the same person here, okay? So we'll talk about some of those, and then we want to talk about archaeological inscriptions that actually are the Bible, are the biblical texts. And I'm saving my favorite to last. You kind of helped me this morning select a favorite, but you were kind of off on my what really was my favorite. I know it's just a utilitarian grinder. I know that, but it is my favorite because it has so many biblical connections. That's why I like an upper milling stone. Okay, so let's go through these and let's look at these. We're going to start with those that provide general background. For instance, and this isn't new to anybody here, Hammurabi's Law Code. When I was in my master's program, we translated from Hammurabi's Law Code, Akkadian cuneiform. And Shuma Awilam, should a person do this, then this happens. It's case law. We have a lot of case law in the Old Testament. And case law, should this happen, should your ox gore your neighbor, this is what you need to do. Should your ox keep goring your neighbor, this is what you need to do. That's case law, and that is from Numbers or Leviticus, one of the two. That I didn't pull that one out of the thin air. That's a case law. Any law from antiquity was understood to come from a god. Israelites, of course, the Israelite God. In this depiction, there is Hammurabi standing in front of a throned god Shamash, the sun god. These laws, they're case laws. They come up as people are living. Why would they come down from God? Well, all laws come from God, period. And it probably has to do with the fact that in lives that are chaotic, and remember what I read about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood in 1200 BC, that was chaotic. That was brutal. In life that is brutal, anything that gives order and structure. Ah, I now know what I need to do next. That comes from God. That's kind of the idea behind all laws. So any law from the ancient world comes from a god, one god or another one. These from Hammurabi's code come from Shamash. Lots of laws, of the case laws here that are the same or similar to ones in Moses. In Moses, in the books of Moses, in the Pentateuch, everything, all the laws come from God, right? So if we want to enter the biblical world, we're entering a world where everybody believed that if you want a life that is structured, if you want a life that is orderly, you have to turn to God. That's kind of the underlying assumption here. Okay, so we won't take time to give you some of the parallels. From a different time, this is from probably the 11th, maybe the 12th century BC, the 1100s. This is a temple, Medinat Habu, in Egypt, and it is built by Ramses III. Now, if one dates the Exodus to the later option, the 13th century, then you're talking about Ramses II. But Ramses III built this temple, and he put not only inscriptions, but depictions. So you can see, even on the walls here, there is text in hieroglyph, and there are depictions of people. So what if we wanted to know what the Philistines looked like? Because Ramses III repelled the sea peoples, including the Pelisheth, who were the Philistines. He kept them at bay and sent them back to the country that now carries their name, Palestine. That's where it comes from. So he conquers the sea peoples, including the Pelisheth, the Philistines. And so what do we have? We have pictures of the Philistines. That's who they are, who are bound and have been conquered. Their arms are wound up and held by rope. So we have that. We have text to identify these people. So if you want to know what a Philistine looks like, okay, we've got it here. Another inscription that is general background is not a real strong biblical connection, but a general background. This text could actually fit into Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. It's a calendar on when to plant certain crops and when to harvest. Some people feel that it was a kind of a school child's test writing tablet. It would have taken quite a bit to do this, but in any case, so the month of such and such is when you harvest olives. The month of such and such is when you do the grapes. So in any case, we've got that. But this is not a direct tie to Bible. This one I mentioned last evening. Those are my fingers holding a jar handle with an inscription in it, impressed with probably a signet ring or something that one would have on a necklace, and impressed. And it was interesting because we just found it as we were excavating away. And this is the inscription, hieroglyph, and the center is the cartouche. When you see the cartouche, this oblong, circled type of inscription, that's a pharaoh's name. So, although you can't see it well, and I can't point it at here, the top is it's kind of a disc, a flat disc, and then you come down and it's a comb. Can you kind of see the comb on its back? And then it's a scarab beetle down below. This is Thutmose III. That if one dates the Exodus earlier, you might have to contend with this guy. So that's the kind of thing that's going on here. Okay, so finding this in a much later context, this is a couple hundred years after Pharaoh Thutmose III. So some of these names, kind of like the George Washington on your $1 bill, they last, right? And we know who they are, and we remember them, and this was Pharaoh Thutmose III. Okay, let's get closer, tie more closely to biblical accounts. Now we get to the cuneiform, cuneiform tablets. Hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets produced in what is primarily what is now Iraq. And so they are, especially if you think about the library of Ashurbanipal, over 100,000 texts in his library. That's incredible. And so then putting these things together and piecing them, you can see this one's broken. So they've got to find a way to piece them together. And this one is one of many copies of a third millennium text called the Gilgamesh Epic. It's worth reading. It's worth reading in part because it has a flood story. It has a flood story in which the gods are so tired of listening to the humans they've created. They just want to get rid of them. It's kind of an interesting story. And so Utnapishtim is taught to build an ark. It's a cube. I don't know how you get this to float, but anyway, it's a cube. And the family goes in, Utnapishtim and his wife and family, and they go in, and the animals, and then they come out, and when they're done, he lets a dove fly, and then he lets a swallow fly, and then he lets a raven fly, and then he makes a sacrifice. Sound familiar? Well, that's because this whole idea of a destructive flood was popular everywhere in the ancient Near East. It shows up in other places too. People have to ask, was that because everybody was thinking back to the flood? Or is it because people worried about water out of control and that the gods were kind of messing with you with it? Lots of debate about this. In any case, this text has a relationship with biblical text, okay? So when we think about that and the connections. From a different time period, this from the 8th century BC in Jerusalem, Hezekiah, the king, dug a tunnel to provide water for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And in the process, they dug this tunnel. It's about 1,800 feet long. You've been to Jerusalem? Some of you have been to Jerusalem? Any of you walked the tunnel? Okay, you did. That's worth it. I mean, if you're claustrophobic, don't think about it. Because it comes down, the ceiling part comes down to your head's almost in the water. It's quite exciting. But in any case, so he dug this tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel was this inscription, which was removed, unfortunately, in the 18th or 19th century. But in any case, it talks about the diggers digging through stone and trying to find, they started from both ends, and they're trying to find each other. And they're trying to find each other through sounds that are being transmitted through stone. That means all kinds of variations. And you can see when they do come together that they have been all over the place and wandered in levels and in other kinds of directions. But in any case, it's spectacular because this is getting close. It doesn't mention Hezekiah, but it is Hezekiah's tunnel, and most people feel that's the case. Okay, let's get close. Let's get close to names. This one, this picture is from a recent issue. Can you see the date up there? December 31, 2024. That's as recent as we can get with an issue of Biblical Archaeology Review. One author has been tracing and keeping track of the number of biblical names that show up in inscriptions. Some of them are a bit of a stretch, but most of them one can say this is pretty much identifiable as this individual that you read about in 2 Kings or in Isaiah. So 83, that's not bad. Okay, there are hundreds of people in the Old Testament, but 83 is not bad. This actually includes the New Testament as well. So that's good. The earliest reference to Israel, to the name Israel, is from the late 13th century, about 1208, 1207 BC. In the Merneptah Stela, in Egypt. Did you see this when you went to? So um, if you get a chance, okay, when you go back next trip, okay, you have to see this. I'll show you in the next slide how big it is. But before I do that, there is a marker here that indicates where the name Israel is mentioned. It's not a nation. The Egyptian language has different prefixes that you can use to say this is a nation, this is a tribal group, this is, this is a family. And so what's used here is not a nation. We don't have a nation of Israel. You'll see the translation in just a minute. But in any case, it's the first outside of the Bible reference to Israel. And there's the size of it, okay? It was in the old Cairo Museum. I'm assuming it's in the new one in Giza. But I've not been there. But let's look at the translation. So the princes are prostrate, saying, peace, shalom. Not one of the 9 bows lifts its head, and so on. This particular person, Jehenu, is vanquished. Kati is at peace. Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon is conquered. Gezer, these are all cities in what would now be Israel. Most of them are. Yanoam is made non-existent. Israel, it's not a state name, but Israel, the people of Israel, is laid waste without any seed to continue its progeny. And then it goes on, Kor is become a widow, etc. So the good news is that the name Israel shows up in this inscription from the late 13th century BC. The bad news is that whoever Israel is here, family, tribe, whatever, area, whatever, have been bonked. Okay, so I want you to get used to this as a theme, okay? For inscriptions where biblical kings' names show up, it's good news because their names show up on inscriptions. Almost always, it's bad news because they have been conquered. So these have been put together, these inscriptions have been put together by others, saying that we came in and we took these Israelites out. Even at the very beginning, when we're not thinking of this as a nation of Israel, we're thinking about this as a people group of some kind. So that's the earliest one. Now this one is a recently discovered, well, a few years ago, at Kaiafa in southwest Israel, an inscription. It's an ostrakhan. It's a piece of broken pottery. Remember, you can do things with broken pieces of pottery. If the kids knock it over and you drop it and it breaks, you can make little spindle whorls, or you can make jar stoppers. You can also make ostraka out of them, which is a broken piece of pottery that you write on with ink. Okay? And this one is interesting because there's debate about the translation, but it seems to mention the Hebrews. That's what it looks like in a drawing. And these are not your typical Hebrew letters. So this is early on, and it's hard to know, but the translation is debated. Maybe it mentions the Hebrews, okay? Another inscription from Tel Dan in the north part of Israel is what is so creatively called the Tel Dan inscription. So here we have it. And it is, as you can see, from the 9th century. It was a victory inscription on a stone that was put into a wall that was then later torn down, and the stone inscription was broken. And there may be some political things going on here because this was first inscribed by a Syrian king, Hazael, about a conquest over the descendants of the house of David. So the house of David inscription is this one. And I'll show you where it is. We'll do it with this drawing. And if you, read with me from the right to the left, all right? So you see an MLK, right? I mean, it looks like an MLK, right? So that means that's the word for melech or king. And then there is a there's a Y and an S that is like a, well, Greek goes in a different direction, but then it's an R and an Aleph and a Lamed. House of Israel. Okay, so there's a king. Part of it's broken off, but we now can reconstruct it. Um, but it says the king of the house of David. I'm sorry, of the house of Israel, the king of Israel. And then the next line has always been more interesting because it's the last letter of the word king, but then it goes to king of the house of David, house of David. This is the first reference, non-biblical, to David. And before this was described, was discovered, it was Roman times. We had no inscriptions of King David. This is not David, though. This is David's lineage. This is a king in the line of David. But it's still got David's name there. Okay, that's really good, right? So this one, this stone, I wanted to publish an article, and I wanted permission from the excavator. So I went to his office at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and I said, I want an official photo and your permission to publish this in an article. And he said, well, you've come at a good time because the actual stone was just delivered to my office last night from the Israel Museum. And then he said, and you've also come at a good time because we found another piece to add to it. So Carmen and I were particularly excited. Maybe I was more excited than Carmen. I don't know. I don't know how to rate those things, but so anyway, this one is close to me because we actually got to look at the real thing. This one is also from the 9th century, and it turns out to have something in common with what we just talked about. But this one is the Moabite stone, or the Mesha inscription. The Mesha inscription, named after the king of the Moabites. Mesha, the god of the Moabites, was Chemosh, and the king was Mesha. This is 9th century, and this stone includes several things about some tribes of Israel. Okay, and it was found in Dibon, a Moabite city. So let's look at it. In fact, there's something. It was broken. It's going to take too long to tell the story, but it's very exciting. So sometime we got to get to that story about the discovery of this stone and why it was broken and why it's. This is a model, a replica. But in any case, right down there below is another reference to the house of David. Same time, okay? So somebody from a king's lineage from the time of David. Again, it's nice to see the name, but they were on the losing end of the battle. That's kind of how it happens. This one is relatively new, found at a site that La Sierra is excavating at Ataruz. And you see that there's an inscription here. When you stand this up, it's an incense stand. But sideways, it has 2 inscriptions on it. And these inscriptions are interesting and debated. But there is one of the inscriptions, and you see an attempt at a translation up there. It looks like it's just material that is being measured, maybe given as an offering. That often happens in temples, where your offering is marked out, so many shekels of so on. The other part of the inscription, you can see the older part, or the other part on its side over there in lighter type, is on the right-hand side here. And some people feel that it mentions Ivri, the Hebrews, as you can see in the translation, right? Others debate that, but in any case, if so, this is about 8th century inscription with the name of the Israelites on it. Okay, this one is an interesting tablet, and it looks fairly fine. It has letters that look normal. Problem is, it's a fake, and it's too bad. It was published as if it weren't a fake. Everybody was excited about it for about 10 minutes. And it was determined that it simply, people do this. People do this for different reasons. People do this to help others have faith in the Bible. Create fake inscriptions. I'll show you another one. So let's remember that there are all of these motivations that drive people to think about archaeology and the Bible, and some of them are helpful, and some of them less so. But in any case, okay. Now this one is, if you haven't seen it before, is going to surprise you, I think, a lot. Okay, maybe a little, but maybe a lot. Kuntilat Ajrud is in the northern Sinai, 8th century. We're talking about the time of Isaiah, of Amos, of Hosea, of Micah. We're talking about those prophets at the time in the 8th century. And pieces of those big storage jars, remember we talked about them, that are this high? And they would hold normally grain or something like that. And when they're broken, they're used for different kinds of things. Well, these broken pieces had painting on them with these images, and they're interesting. They're probably deities, or at least some individuals connected with worship. So what's the person on the right doing? There's some music going on here, right? Okay, so there's a harpist here. The others, good question. The Egyptian god Bes is a god who is always depicted as quite ugly. And this is the god who is somehow working with childbirth. And the god Bes is probably there. Then you have a couple of animals. That may be two depictions of Bes. It's hard to tell. Well, the one on the right is female. You see the two, the pair, the couple? So the one on the right, actually, the harp player and then the next one over, they're both female, right? Those are tails, okay? I just to be anatomically clear, those are tails. So then you have a male, probably Bes, at least represented by the way people drew Bes, and then a woman. So what does the text say? You see it up there? So I'm going to give you the translation. May you be blessed by Yahweh of Samaria. Did I finish the sentence or not? And his Asherah. You've read about Asherah in the Old Testament. One of the consorts of Baal, of Baal. So you have El and Baal, the chief Canaanite deities, and Anat and Asherah. What is Yahweh doing here? So, if the Bible tells us what we're supposed to do, and archaeology tells us what they were doing, what were they doing? One could put it that way, but that's pretty scientific. That's an overlay, a pretty scientific overlay. At least they were making use of what their neighbors were doing. And the notion of the pure monotheistic God Yahweh really only becomes entirely clear in the 6th century BC. There is only one God, there are no others. This is much before that. So, what were people doing? Did God have a wife? In the Bible, not so much. In real life, yes. So, how did people practice? Okay, you've got, and if you are a female, and if you are a wife, and if you are a mother, all of a sudden, deity is more accessible. Think about this. Think about why people were drawn to a female deity. It's not something we like because we read the Bible the way we read the Bible. But is it possible that that people were looking for a nourishing religious experience? Okay, so That's a possibility. This is interesting. Okay, I'm going to come to another one shortly. But before we get there, Tiglath-Pileser the third, 8th century. Notice he mentions Rezin of Damascus and Menachem of Samaria in this text. Once again, you see the people at the receiving end of these weapons. That's normally where these the names cited end up. They're at the receiving end of the spears. This one we found at Ameri, at our site, and it says belonging to Baal, belonging to Baal. We don't have the rest of the inscription. It's actually quite amazing that somebody took the time with a piece of pottery to inscribe something before they fired it. We don't know what the rest of it says, but we do have that interesting note. Now, Jeremiah, if we're looking for the kind of connection between inscriptions and the biblical text, it's when we get to the time of Jeremiah that it explodes with all kinds of inscriptions that match. If you go back to we're talking 7th century, so if you go back to the 8th century, yes, we have inscriptions. Most of them are outside of Israel. If you go back beyond that, it gets a little bit more tenuous. You do have something back in the late 13th century, like we saw with the Merneptah stela, but it's when you get into the 8th, 7th, 6th centuries BC, when we have the kingdoms, Israelite and Judean kingdoms, it explodes with written material that we now can compare. Okay, so let's look. Jeremiah, is it 25? I've forgotten now. This is bad on my part. I think it's Jeremiah 25. One chapter in Jeremiah contains the name of several dozen people. 6 of those people we have inscriptions to identify. Not just by their name, but by their name and their father's name. Okay? So it really explodes. These are little. Well, this one is a ring, a signet ring. So you can see how that stamp might have been put on that jar handle with Tutmosis III. You could do it with a ring like this. But this one, we're not quite to Jeremiah yet, but actually at the end. But this one reads, belonging to, from the top, Hanan, a person by the name of Hanan. And then there's a letter at the left end of the top row and a letter at the beginning of the second row that forms the word for son, Ben. Hanan ben Hilkiah, HaKohen, the priest. That connects, okay? Hilkiah was a priest well known in the material in 2 Kings and in Jeremiah. So, okay, this works. This is good. Okay, we're on a roll here, okay? And this roll is going to work for us for a while, actually. So this article in Biblical Archaeology Review from several years ago by Herschel Shanks, the editor at the time, pulled together a lot of these, what we call bulli. They're little pieces of clay that have been stamped. Sometimes they're used on documents. Sometimes they're used on bottles to seal them. So that's the notion of a bulli, or a bulla as singular. So let's look at some of them. So this one, belonging to, and you can read it from right to left if you like, and we even have the Hebrew up here if you'd like. Or we could go right over to the English if you'd like. We could do that too. So belonging to Berechiyahu, son of Neriyahu, the scribe. Who was Jeremiah's scribe? Baruch, the son of Neriah, the scribe. This is inescapable. This is our guy, okay? We've nailed him. He's here. And that's good to know. Okay, let's keep going. All in this one chapter in Jeremiah, okay? Belonging to Elishama, servant of the king. That's an interesting title, servant of the king. That's also how he is identified in Jeremiah, servant of the king. Then we go to Yerahma'el, Ma'el, son of the king, also identified with this title, son of the king. Okay, so interesting connections. There are more from that time period. All right. So I mean that's if we're looking for the kind of good news confirmation sorts of things, these names are not bad. They're pretty good. Now this one, the one that you're looking at now, is some of you have seen it from last night, but I'm going to come back to it. Is from our site at Tel El Ameri in Jordan, and it was found the first couple of days of our excavation, just in the topsoil, just found, and it is the size of a thimble, and it's inscribed on the top with this quite detailed inscription for the size of a thimble. And as you look at it from here, the drawing, 6th century, and then we're going to do the reading. Okay, so belonging to, and then there's the name, and then there are 3 letters that make the word servant, and then the name of the official, the name of the king at the bottom. So this is a stamp belonging to one of the king's officials who has been given authority to stamp things, whether it's food, offerings, whatever. And he has this official stamp. The name of the official is Milcom Or. That's the name of the Ammonite god, Milcom. Or is the word for light. So it belongs to a guy, an official, whose name is, my God is light. Milcom is light. That's what his name means. So he's carrying this around. And this is his official name. And then the servant, those 3 letters, there's a little, looks like an O, and then looks like a kind of a Y that kind of got squared off. And then there's another letter. That's the word for ebed or servant, or can be slave, but it's usually a servant. And in this case is an official of the king. And the king's name is at the bottom, and that is Baal Yasha. Baal Yasha means Baal saves. Baal rescues. Baal is your hope for rescue. Baal, okay? Baal Yasha. That's his official name. This is an Ammonite king. His name does show up in the Bible, but the names have been changed to protect somebody. It's now Baalis, B-A-A-L-I-S. And the ending doesn't mean anything. That's probably why Jeremiah used it. He probably took off the ending, didn't like it, and changed it to an ending that doesn't mean anything, Baalis. But it turns out that his real name, Jeremiah tried to trick us a bit here, give us Baalis. His real name is Baal Yasha. He was an Ammonite king. And this is the king we talked about last night who sponsored the successful assassination attempt against Gedaliah, the governor set up by Nebuchadnezzar in Judah through the hands of one Ishmael. And you can read about this, and you can read about, it's in Jeremiah 40:14. You can read about the fact that Gedaliah's advisors were saying, you cannot trust this Ishmael guy. You cannot trust him. And he said, no, don't worry about it. Well, it's Ishmael who assassinated him at the request of Baal Yasha. So we've got his real name. We can connect it to the Bible. We can also make a correction, okay, to the name that was given to us. Okay, some others. Let's go quickly here. The Babylonian Chronicle. This is one tablet of many, many, many that represent the time period of the Babylonian control. And the Babylon, of course, means something as we read the Bible. The Babylonian captivity. I mean, you can't read through most of the Old Testament without bumping into the Babylonian captivity sometime. So notice that on this particular, there are 2 images here. One is a cuneiform tablet, and another one is a brick stamp, stamped with Nebuchadnezzar's name. So Nebuchadnezzar, king of Akkad, marched his armies into Hatti. He laid siege to the city of Judah. Okay, we've got the name of Judah, but Good news that it's there, but it's being sieged, okay? Um, he captured the city on the second day of February. We're coming to the anniversary, right? Um, second day of February is a translation. Okay, not quite exactly what it said. He appointed a new king to his liking, carried away a great amount of plunder from Judah to Babylon. This is when he carried away uh, um, Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim. It's a CH, and we often want to pronounce it with chin, but it should be pronounced ken, Jehoiakim, which is interesting because Jehoiakim was the last king in the line of David that the people of Judah and Jerusalem looked to as some kind of hope to get us out of this mess we're in with the Babylonians. Jehoiakim can do it. He's in the line of David. We're putting a lot of hope on him. In 698, he ends up, 598, so I'll get my centuries correct. 598, he ends up going into captivity, and the hope is gone. The Babylonian captivity was the end of everything. The Babylonian captivity was the end of the Davidic line. It was the end of the temple. It was the end of priestly sacrifices. If you want to get forgiven for sins, you've come into a dead end. It's the end of this lineage. Jehoiakim, they're watching him go into captivity. That is their last hope. Something interesting happens at the very end of the book of 2 Kings, which is not only reported in 2 Kings, but we have a Babylonian tablet that says the same thing. The end of the book of Kings, which is the end of a long series of books called the Deuteronomic history, because it's based on the theology of Deuteronomy. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. That's the Deuteronomistic history. The very end of that history, after everything plunges, the time of the judges ends with total catastrophe. The only way out of this is with a David. Okay? So you get a David, but then the kingdom keeps sliding down. They keep going down. And then they end up going into captivity. And your only hope has been imprisoned in Babylon. The end of the book of 2 Kings says that the king, the Babylonian king, Evil-Merodach at the time, Evil-Marduk, gave to Jehoiakim provisions and invited the king to eat at his table. This is the guy that everybody had pinned hopes on, that watched him go into captivity, and I don't remember, it's 20 years or so later, that it's in 561, I think, that Jehoiakim is now brought to eat at the king's table. There is hope. So, see, if we were living in biblical times, and if we were living in Jerusalem, and we found out that, there might be some hope for this king. And here it is at the end of the book of Kings. He has been invited to eat at the king's table. And it also shows up in another Babylonian tablet. Okay, we got to get to, I want to say something about the brick. For those of you who might feel guilty for picking something up in the Holy Land and sticking it in your purse. Okay, I've already done a gender thing there, right? Okay, but if you feel guilty for having picked something up, I want you to know about a wonderful, slight, delicate, older woman who came into my office when I was dean of theology at Walla Walla, and she said, "I'm so embarrassed. I feel so sheepish." And she said, I had to bring it in a brown paper bag. But when I was a missionary and we returned home, we stopped in Iraq. And we stopped in Babylon. And there were these bricks all over the place. They had Nebuchadnezzar's name on them. And I said, I just picked one up and stuck it in my purse. That's what she did. And so she brought it home and she said, I'm so sorry. She says, but I'm going to give it to you. So I have that. Well, I think it's still at Walla Walla. We have another one, a second one at La Sierra. But these were made by the thousands. But still, to have Nebuchadnezzar's name on it is not bad, right? Okay, so we're making these connections. This one is actually a tomb from a later time, from the 4th, 5th century, to recognize an 8th century king, King Uzziah. Book of Isaiah and Book of Amos talks about Uzziah too. The Lachish letter, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because it does refer though to the destruction of a city when the Babylonians came, finally in 587, 86. They came and they destroyed lots of surrounding cities first, and then they headed for Jerusalem. Lachish in southwest Israel is one of those cities. And we have written on broken pieces of pottery with ink these ostraca that represent kind of the last message from one of the soldiers in Lachish to his commander in Jerusalem. That's what we've got, okay? This is, I mean, it's touching. It is very touching. So it doesn't have a biblical name on it, but let's look at it and see what it says. So may Yahweh, may God, cause my Lord to hear this very day tidings of good. And now, according to everything which my Lord has sent, this your servant has done. I wrote on the sheet according to everything which you sent me. It must have been a list of something that he had to keep. And inasmuch as my Lord sent to me concerning the matter of Bet Harapid, there must have been some sideshow going on here. Somebody was in trouble, and there was probably some rumors going on. In any case, as to the matter of this person, there's this place, there is no one there. And as for Semekyahu, now we've got a person, Semayahu took him, brought him up to the city. And your servant is not sending him there for anymore. In other words, this issue we think is solved. It's over. But when morning comes, when it comes round, and then there's a break, and may my Lord be apprised that we are watching for the fire signals of Lachish, according to the signs which my Lord has given. But we can no longer see Azekah. So these signals would be sent by fires from high points in the cities. And all of a sudden, the Babylonians have been coming through. All of a sudden, Azekah has fallen. This is probably the last letter to come from Lachish. And it just captures the pathos of this destruction. Again, we don't have, well, we have some site names, but we don't have personal names. The Cyrus cylinder from the 6th century. This is terrific. We won't spend any time with it, but yes. Correct. Correct. This is the latest. Exactly. Exactly. These cities tend to find their way back. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So in any case, that is the case. You've got both of those, and it's sometimes easy to confuse them. So the Cyrus cylinder was written in honor of Cyrus, the king of Persia, his conquest of the Babylonians, which meant that the Israelites in captivity might have a shot at going home. That's what this is all about. This document is one of the best and earliest examples of really good diplomacy. Really good. People talk about the Cyrus document as a way that we should be talking to each other, even in the political sphere. And he's one who says, look, all of these people have come to Babylon. They've been forced out of their places of worship. I'm going to send them back to their places. I'm going to rebuild their places of worship. Is that good diplomacy or what? And so we have that text. He's also kind of like all ancient kings. He loves himself a lot. And so he says, may all of these gods of the temples where I'm sending back people, where I'm sending them back to, may they all be happy and celebrate my name. Um, and it's an interesting thing because it's Cyrus by name. And when you read in Isaiah 45, they called Cyrus by name. I mean, the parallel there is pretty tight. And in any case, it's it's good stuff. Cyrus cylinder is good stuff. Now this one is a papyrus, so we're moving toward times when papyrus plants survived. And so this one is from Elephantine. It's an island in the Upper Nile, and it's a place where in the 4th, 5th centuries BC, Jewish communities forced to leave their hometowns, especially during the Babylonian captivity, settled in this island. And it became not just a Jewish colony, but largely so. So here's a temple, and that temple is archaeologically available, but also texts. And I don't have the translation here for you, but you're going to have to trust me on this one. May you be blessed by Yahweh. Is there more to this sentence? Are you expecting me to say something more? And his Anat. So it's not Asherah. It's now the wife of El, not Baal. So anyway. So the Jews in the 5th century were worshiping a couple. This is part of what archaeology tells us that life was like in ancient times. Okay, we need to get scooting. Okay, Tobiah. This is the name Tobiah. He is an Ammonite, and he is mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, along with Sanballat and one other. Sanballat, Tobiah, and there's one other in there, and they tried to thwart the rebuilding of the temple. And so Tobiah's name. This is on a cave in Jordan. He was an Ammonite. But it's interesting. His name is Hebrew. His name is Yah, which means Yahweh, Tobiah. So he was Tobiah, Hebrew name, but he was Ammonite. And he was a troublemaker. But now we have that other connection. New Testament, a couple of inscriptions from the New Testament. One of the markers, there have been a couple of them found. When the temple was built, Herod's temple, and there were several different plazas, right? There's a plaza where only priests could go, and then only men could go, and then only Israelites could go, and then the Gentiles were outside. This is one of the markers on the entryway, one of the stairs going up, to tell the Gentiles that they will be responsible for their own death if they cross this sign. It's a kind of the welcoming committee, right? Welcome to church. Watch it. Watch your step. But there's more than one of these, and that does say something. Let's face it, the debates about being exclusive and inclusive have gone on forever. The Babylonian exile forced ancient Judah into two camps. One of them was Ezra, Nehemiah, get rid of your foreign wives and kids. The other one is the last part of Isaiah. This is a house of prayer for all people. Even the lame. I want the lame ministering in my temple. So those are two answers, both biblical. These are two answers to the problem of the exile. How do we avoid it again? You got the one side that says, get rid of everybody that doesn't look quite like us. And what they would do was divide people up. So we knew these people are Israelite. We know these people are Gentile. And then we've got some in the middle that we're really not sure about. So they had to take time. That's what they did. They took time to decide about those. But the people on the other side, goodbye. That's not the Isaiah approach, which is so much more inclusive. We don't have that debate still going, right? No, okay. Never mind. I'm I'm not going there. Okay. So, but this does represent that. This is an ossuary, a stone box of Caiaphas, the high priest, right? And on the end of it, there is his name, Caiaphas. So these are stone boxes were used primarily in the first century, maybe into BC, but mostly the first century AD. So it's a Roman period thing. But this one, I'm coming to another one of those in a minute. This is an inscription at Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean coast, and this is the reference to Pilate. So you have Pilatus, Pontius Pilatus, written in Latin on this inscription. So if people wondered about Pontius, okay, we have his inscription. Okay, this is the James ossuary, which has been subject to all kinds of debate for a couple of decades. The most of the debate, well, some of it has to do with the ossuary itself, but most of it has to do with the inscription. And you can see the inscription on the side of it. We're going to get closer to it. And so there we see, and if you look from the right, there is, oh, I went to the left. Never mind. Hold that thought. Okay, from the right, it's Yaakov, and then Bar, this is Aramaic, Bar Yosef. So this is Jacob or James, the son of Joseph. Then, the part that stirred everybody into a frenzy was this part, which says, the brother of Yeshua, of Jesus. Turns out that's probably fake. It'd be nice, okay, but it's probably fake. And there were lots of Josephs, and there were lots of Yaakovs. So to pin this one down, it's not as easy as Barak Yahu, the son of Neriah, the scribe. So people have debated this, but this is probably a later forgery. The guy who did this went to jail, and then he was exonerated. So who knows what's going on with all of this stuff. Okay, so this one I'm going to skip. It's another New Testament. I'm going to get to this last category, which is archaeological inscriptions that are the Bible. Okay? So we've moved from the wider world of the Bible to connections with biblical stories, to specifics like names, to the Bible itself. Okay, so what do we have here? We have several things. Qumran and the Dead Sea Scrolls. We did a series a year ago. We always do a series in November where we have specialists come to La Sierra. We do this online. It's actually available. You can get to it from our website, the lectures, but it was on the Dead Sea Scrolls. And we had several of the specialists who worked with the Dead Sea Scrolls on our campus. And so we talked about these, and the ones that matter the most to us in our context now are the ones that are biblical scrolls, biblical manuscripts. About 200 of about 900. So about 200 are biblical. And these were mostly found in Cave 4, which is, you can't, no, I can't, the pointer doesn't work on the screen. But it's the one that sticks out right here. That's Cave 4. And that's where most of the biblical material was found. All of the biblical books except, some of you know this. This will be on the quiz. Esther. Esther is not there. And if you read the book of Esther, it does not mention the name of God. And it seems like a pretty happy group. They're in drinking parties a lot of the time. The process of canonization was a long and complicated one, but this community certainly did not seem to like it. Probably did not celebrate Purim. So in any case, so most of them, as I say, found in Cave 4, which I mean it's carved out of a fairly soft kind of material. There are some of the scrolls. This is part of the Isaiah scroll. I mean, they're just spectacular. The Shrine of the Book is part of the Israel Museum. And you have these. Most of these are kept away, and there are replicas to see. but this is a picture of the real. This one is another part of the Isaiah scroll, reading again from right to left as Hebrew is. Nice penmanship. I mean, these are spectacular. The Essenes were incredible scribes, and they saved for us. Well, they gave to us texts of the Bible fully 1,000 years older than we had before. The oldest we had were the Masoretic texts from about 1000 AD. These take us into the 2nd and into the 3rd century BC. I mean, there is nothing like it. And to think about it as biblical. Okay, I'm going to go to another text. This one is interesting. The name of Yahweh, you can see them, is in a different script, right? Just kind of look at it. And it's a kind of a squarish letter before and after. And these are kind of flowing and kind of at an angle. They are actually Paleo, Old Hebrew. And this was a way of maintaining reverence for the name of God. Okay, you could write it in the text and it would be there and it would be special, but you make a special reverence of it by putting it into the Old Hebrew. See, old isn't bad. I mean, right? Am I right? Okay, old is good. Are we good? Are we okay? Okay. This one is so much fun because it's one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a Deuteronomy one. Deuteronomy was popular. Isaiah was popular at Qumran, but Deuteronomy was very popular. Incidentally, there is a new exhibit at the Ronald Reagan Library on the Dead Sea Scrolls that will run until August. So, if sometime you want to go see some Dead Sea Scrolls, you can do that. Some of you probably saw them in Seattle, right? Did some of you? Yes, okay. That was a while ago, okay. But they also have been in San Diego at the Natural History Museum, which is kind of an odd place to put them. But we did a class on the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was several years ago. And so I had 10 undergraduate and 25 graduate students. We hopped on a bus every Monday evening, drove to San Diego. It's a 2-hour drive. And in the process, got there to hear a lecture from the top Dead Sea Scrolls scholars. Every Monday night they had them. And then they had an exhibit too. So, and our students made us all proud. They were the ones who asked the good questions. So we would do conversation on the way down and then watch an archaeology movie on the way back. Okay, so we made good use of our time on the bus. This one is interesting though. If you have thought about it recently, there are 2 different reasons, and Adventists have to think about this. There are 2 different reasons in the Pentateuch for keeping the Sabbath. So Exodus 20, that's the one we memorize usually, because why? Because God created the heavens and the earth. Therefore, the word lachain in Hebrew follows that. Therefore, keep the Sabbath. In Deuteronomy, that's not the same. In the Deuteronomy 10 Commandments, it is because God brought you out of bondage and rescued you from slavery. Lachain, therefore, keep the Sabbath. This made a little bit of a problem for the scribes at Qumran. And this manuscript does a very fine thing, I think. It puts them both. So you have both the creation, that's a good reason for keeping the Sabbath, and rescue from bondage. They're both here. So they've transported the Exodus part, put it in there, and then they've put the Deuteronomy and kept the Deuteronomy part. So I see that not everybody is as excited as I am about this. But okay, so it's playing with the text. But they're both there, they're both in the text, and they're both good reasons, right? They're both good reasons. And they're both biblical, right? Please. So the comment has to do with the Sabbath and the bringing out of bondage. That is a theme that matters. That is a theme that really matters. We could actually make more of that. When's your next sermon? Pastor? No, okay. I won't put you on the spot about this. But we could make a lot more of that other reason for keeping Shabbat, for keeping Sabbath. Yeah, yeah. Is not having both really workable? I like both. I like the scroll because they actually did what we wondered why they hadn't done for a long time, and that's combine them because they're in the Ten Commandments, right? So, okay. Anyway, this is a fun one. Okay. So then we've got a couple more here. This one is a piece of papyrus. Okay, so it's the reed from Egypt that was sliced thin and then laid down in rows and then cross rows laid on them, and then you have your lines for writing. They glue together from their own the plant's material. And this particular papyrus, papyrus doesn't keep well in Palestine, but it does okay in Egypt. And this one is called the John Rylands papyrus from around 125 AD. John was written around 90. So we're only, a few years from the Gospel of John itself. And this one has on it a part of John 18 and actually it's all from John 18. But when you had to save papyrus, I was going to save paper, but when you have to save papyrus, you write on both sides. So that's what we have here, and they're both from John 18. This is probably the oldest text of the New Testament Gospels that we have, and that's great. It's from the Gospel of John. Who can argue with that? That's great. Okay, one more. One more is I've saved my favorite till the last. Okay, so you won't have to guess on this one. This is my favorite. It's a silver amulet that would be worn on a necklace. It's very small, about this big, worn, rolled up inside a little container and worn on a necklace. And it has a biblical text on it. I love this amulet. It was discovered in Ramat Rahel, just south of Jerusalem. You can see it from the 7th century. It is a biblical text. So it's not just a name, it's not just context, it is a text of the Bible. And it is, I think, one of the best there is. So the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift his face to you and give you shalom. The Lord lift his face to you is an interesting metaphor because you normally lift your face to your superior. The Lord lifts his face to us to give us shalom. Nice thought. Do we have questions? Did we want to do questions? Already is nap time coming? Anybody have questions that we want to talk about? Yeah. Okay. The question is, who do these belong to? And it is true, some countries are more restrictive than others. Some countries you can't take anything out. Jordan has been more generous, but it's becoming more like that. Israel, you certainly can't keep anything. So these belong to the Israeli government. What we find in Jordan belongs to the Jordanian government, Egyptian stuff to the Egyptian government. Right. Anything else? So how strict is Israel? I have not ever had the need to do that. Done, I've not been part of an excavation in Israel, so I've never really bumped into that. But I think everybody is tightening, and so I don't know the. Yeah, yeah. Okay, 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 okay. Now, yes, yes. Actually, no, you open another window, and I'll just take a minute with this one, okay? So, if you go to Jerusalem, if you go to the Old City, and if you go to the dealers, you can buy anything. And you can get a permit. And it's genuine stuff. We don't know where it's from. It's been looted from tombs. That's a problem. And when you buy it, you have set up funding for the next person to loot another tomb. That's the challenge that we face. So, in any case, um, you can, and they will give you a paper. It's the same paper they gave the tourists before you. And it may have different numbers, but it's the same thing. So it's not documentation, but they're allowed to do it. The Israeli government allows them to do it because for generations it's been a source of survival, of economic survival. And so it's actually a kind of a mercy thing. But so yeah, if you go to the tourist markets, yeah, you can. If you have enough, you can buy pretty much anything and get the appropriate documentation. What we have in our labs at La Sierra, we have thousands of artifacts that we have excavated. We have been given thousands of excavated artifacts. So they're genuine. We know where they came from, we know their story. But we have 10,000 artifacts donated to us by a dealer in Jerusalem. And we don't know their story. And so that's a problem. But they were donated during or before, it was in the 90s, and they were donated because the dealer worried that he wouldn't be able to do it in the future. And it really wasn't, I use the word donation, it was a donation with some serious strings attached. Um, but in any case, so we have those. So we have these thousands of artifacts from the Jerusalem area. But yeah, that's not what happens much anymore. So yes. Right. Right. So the question has to do with the technologies for reading text on rolled up scrolls that may be in the most horrible condition and still being able to do it with the technology. Yes. In fact, it's happening at quite a pace. Um, there were discovered in Petra, this is a bit ago, there were discovered in Petra in a church, in a Byzantine church, 6th century church, um, a whole room full of burned scrolls. And when you look at burned scrolls, they are the texture of burned cardboard, right? So what can you? Well, some of them lent themselves to being opened. Acor. Did you get to Acor? Okay, I thought you had. Okay. Anyway, at Acor is where they do this, and they'll open some. Some they cannot do that without destroying them, and so then they will bring other technology, and they are doing amazing things with the technology of reading scrolls without unrolling them, and being able to get to layers and to do back and front. Um, it's amazing. Yes. So about 70% of cultural heritage is gone. We don't do well. We do not do well at protecting people or our culture. We just don't. No. It's massive. Similar, but not to the same extent, in Iraq. Um, there's one guy who is an angel who was in the military, and he had training in the preservation of cultural heritage in Iraq. And he was fingered to train soldiers what the difference is between that building over there and a temple that should be saved. And why are you parking your tank on this particular place? So Bogdanos was his name. He continues to educate on how to preserve, especially in military situations, how to preserve cultural heritage. I saw him last at a conference in Jordan when several artifacts had been returned. They had been purchased by a hedge fund investor um, and had been purchased illegally, and because of an agreement actually signed in 2019, an agreement between the United States and Jordan that anything found of Jordanian cultural heritage that cannot be documented needs to come back to Jordan. So I was in Jordan when these came back, and Bogdanos was there, and he was talking about what it meant to save these artifacts. So, I mean, it's a big debate. You'd send everything back, would they get lost, keep them in our museum? Anyway, it's a big debate. But protecting cultural heritage, we have to do. We have to do. Please. Correct. So the question has to do with using drones and laser technology for trying to see things without digging them. I have a colleague at Walla Walla whom some of you may know, John Cole, engineering, who loved the idea of coming to Jordan and excavating without actually doing the work. It was terrific. But he had ground penetrating radar. So that's what he would use. And so he would draw this across, and you could get down, depending on the soil, you could get down sometimes several meters. We know how deep the settlement is on Ameri. It's about 8 meters. It's 25 feet because of ground penetrating radar. But the drones, there is drone technology, there is aerial technology to be able to do that too. I'm not too acquainted with it. What we used drones for was to do photogrammetry, which means to take these hundreds of photos. We recreated our site, our whole site, three-dimensionally by using a drone to do it. So those kinds of technologies exist. I'm sure there are aerial things. You can read about the aerial discoveries of Mayan cities in the jungle, hidden in the jungle, but discoverable because of these technologies. So yes, the technologies are terrific. They are. Please. Right, right, right. I will. The question has to do with you're thinking particularly of Noah's Ark, but the whole idea of going and looking for these fantastic, sensational sorts of finds, and doing so without necessarily the sufficient training to do so. Noah's Ark, of course, has been of interest, continues to be for lots of people. No, there is no scientific evidence to suggest that, to support it, one way or another. There are different mountains, different locations. Does that mean it didn't happen? No, it just means that we don't have it. And whoever publishes it needs to be questioned. Now, I will say that, so I've said that. So I've got that out, okay? That's off my system, that's off my chest, all right? But I will say this, that there is currently a project involving at least one Andrews University scholar who is an archaeologist, is a colleague of mine, and it's an attempt to do the best we can know archaeologically, scientifically about this area, and that's going to come out in a book at some point. So we're probably looking at better sources of information. when we have a resource like that. We'll see. We'll see what that looks like. My sense is that whenever anybody goes looking for something, I want to catch a flight the other way. That is such an unfortunate approach. Let me tell you another example, a different ark, okay, the Ark of the Covenant. Some of you may remember the name Howard, what was his last name? Kansas. He lived in Kansas. And in the 80s, he went with a group that he got together to look for the Ark of the Covenant. So this was a search for the Ark, which is never good, I don't think. And so he went to several places, but he ended up going into a cave on the western side of Mount Nebo. And there are textual references to this. That Jeremiah, these come from the Apocrypha, right? That Jeremiah hid the Ark of the Covenant in a cave in Mount Nebo. So this guy got this group together and went looking for it. And in the process, they violated national laws. They violated military laws because it was a military zone at the time. They violated any kind of scientific approaches. And what they ended up with, they found a box. It was a brass kind of box. And my mentor, Siegfried Horn, said, "Oh, that looks like a box that's been nailed together with modern nails. So is that the Ark of the Covenant?" No. So anyway, so people find and photograph what they want to. You'll notice that often the photographs people send back are blurry, not too detailed, not identified as to time and place. You got a wildlife capture camera, and you're going to capture Bigfoot, and it's blurry. He's going to go fast. So I think we're better. I think we spend our time more helpfully and usefully by celebrating what we do find, going at it scientifically, and then making connections. Let's do it in the right order. And if we find something as exciting as an ark, okay, but we've done it in the right way, and we've not lost credibility. Who was it that was telling me? I don't know if she is still here. She was here last night and said that she'd gotten some phone calls. She talked to friends, put it on a Facebook feed, that there's this biblical archaeology thing in Port Townsend, and she got really bad feedback that people who study the Bible should not be doing archaeology, and archaeologists should not be studying the Bible. And the reason is some people have made us look really bad. And it's this kind of thing that is, we do not gain by going on these adventures, and we lose a lot. If we want credibility, have to do it right. Just have to do it right. Okay? Okay, one more. Okay. So what are we talking about here is chronology and what we have for timelines. Okay, so hold off just a minute, Pastor. So the oldest I have excavated is from 3000 BC. What we have measured, if we're going to take the science seriously, if we're going to take tree ring chronology seriously, that can be traced to 10,000 years. If we want to take other sorts of measuring technologies seriously, then we are talking about some long periods of time. Archaeologically, people talk about the Stone Ages. And you have Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Middle, Neolithic, New. The Neolithic brings us actually up to about 4500 BC. Okay? And then you've got copper, chalcolithic, and then you've got bronze, and then you've got iron. So those are how the ages are mapped out. And Neolithic settlements are typically dated from 4,500 to about 8,000, 8,300. That's New Stone Age. Those settlements are everywhere, and they are inescapably that old. They just are. So how far back did you say you wanted me to go? So, but okay. So okay. So, but I can answer your question easily about how far I have dug, and that's 3,000 BC. But archaeology, we keep discovering things, and the time measuring systems that the chemists and the physicists use continue to be calibrated, but they are usually calibrated as longer, not shorter. So we have to, if we're a part of the modern world, we have to be aware that, we have to be aware, but we have to understand and know the sorts of technologies dealing with real remains. We just have to be aware of them. Whether you want to go that way, that's up to you. But one has to be aware. If a student comes to La Sierra and they want to know archaeologically, what can we talk about chronologically? I will tell them, I said, your beliefs may prevent you from accepting this. It's okay. But you have to know about it. You cannot be a graduate student and not know about it. And so that's how we work with it. And the reason, if you were here last night, you saw that quote from William Dever, who celebrated Adventist archaeology. One of the reasons is that we have been absolutely, completely, totally committed to understanding what we find and doing it scientifically. We have been absolutely committed to that. Siegfried Horn, I mentioned something about this before. Siegfried Horn was incredibly disappointed after about 1.5 seasons at Heshbon, because he discovered that the era of Sihon, king of the Amorites, there was nothing at Heshbon that went that far back. Nothing. And so he had to deal with this. So he had a couple of graduate students. Graduate students are a pain, but they're really good. And they got under his skin. And Siegfried Horn, I love the guy to death. He was my mentor. But he was Germanic too, and he could kind of cut up the stance. But in any case, you got these graduate students, and they're saying, look, we have an opportunity that nobody else has had. We know we can't get the answers that we came for. We can't identify Heshbon as this site as Sihon, king of the Amorites. We can't do it. What can we do? See, here's where I fall back to my line that with archaeology in the Bible, there's good news and there's potentially good news. What can we do with what we have? So the Heshbon dig provided the most sophisticated and complete listing. It's a typology. We call it a typology of pottery all the way up to modern times, because we had the artifacts there. That is a gift to all of the world studying and trying to preserve the cultural heritage. So what do we make of it when we find ourselves in a pinch? Let's make the best of it. Let's do something good. And in the process, we did. And we have credibility. The Manitoba Plains Project is going to have, it's celebrating its 50th anniversary. You were here last night. You saw that. And we are going to have a celebration in Boston at the meeting of the American Society of Overseas Research, ASOR. Been around for 125 years. It is the society that scholars belong to who work in the Middle East. And we're having a reception to celebrate the 50th anniversary. We have people who write and tell us about how important the work that we do is to them. We cannot lose or risk losing that kind of credibility. So we've got work to do, and we'll keep doing it. And I know the pastor wants, I'm sure there's a prayer coming. So we are you ready for that?
You're bringing things into my mind.
Okay, well, I was not a psychology major, so anyway, but thank you for the good questions. They were really good, so thank you.
When my mind expands, it feels like joy. And so many times when we come to church, we don't have anything expansive. And this is just lovely that we could all be here together and that we can expand together. It's wonderful.
Amen.
That wonderful, wonderful. And I wish I had a little book, but the book we give is on the Olympic Peninsula. And we think you've probably been to all those places. But we will dream up something and then I'll come visit you. So I needed the help of my committee, to make that happen, I think. Just God bless you. And all your time building that museum, and may the money flow. Maybe that's what we should pray for him, right? Do that intercessory prayer for the money to come from the state of Jordan to finish your project for sure. Okay, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for knowledge and exploration of new places and things and old things too. And thank you, Lord, for the work that has been done. And I pray for your blessing upon each person that does this work, that they can go about it in such a way that they can be intellectually honest and faithful continually. And Lord, I pray that the money will come for Dr. Clark to be able to build and furnish and then stock that museum with wonderful things. That will be the end of that pilgrimage tour when people come to Jordan, that they can learn a lot about the people that lived there in the past. I pray for the blessing of good health upon him and upon Carmen, and when they are here in this beautiful part of the world, may they just breathe in your peace. And may it replenish them to do the work that you've called them to do. And thank you that they have shared with us this day. And may we all think hard about the things that we've heard. I ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you all for coming.